Hi, I'm Jonathan Hafetz, and welcome to Law and Film, a podcast that explores the rich connections between law and film. Law is critical to many films. Films, in turn, tell us a lot about the law. In each episode, we'll examine a film that's noteworthy from a legal perspective. What legal issues does the film explore? What does it get right about the law, and what does it get wrong? And what does the film teach us about the law and the larger social context in which the law operates? Our film today is The Mauritanian, a 2021 film directed by Kevin Macdonald based on the book Guantanamo Diary by Mohamedou Ould Slahi. The film tells the story of Mohamedou Slahi's nightmare odyssey of secret rendition, torture, and lawless detention at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, a journey that lasted 15 years until he was finally released in 2016, never having been charged with any offense. The book, which Mr. Slahi wrote and which was published while he was still a prisoner at Guantanamo, went on to become an acclaimed international bestseller. The film brings Mohamedou Slahi's gripping and moving story to light. It features an all-star cast, including Tahar Rahim as Mohamedou Slahi, Jodie Foster as Nancy Hollander, Mohamedou's lead lawyer, Shailene Woodley as Teri Duncan, Nancy's co-counsel, and Benedict Cumberbatch as Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Couch, the military officer assigned to prosecute Mr. Slahi initially for war crimes. The film was nominated for and won numerous awards, including a Golden Globe for Jodi Foster's portrayal of Nancy Hollander. I'm honored to have two incredibly special guests to discuss this film today. First, we have Mohamedou Slahi, the author of Guantanamo Diary, the book on which The Mauritanian was based. Mohamedou Ould Slahi was born in Rosso, Mauritania, the ninth of 12 children of a camel herder. His family moved to the capital of Nouakchott when he was a child, where he excelled in school and earned a scholarship to study electrical engineering in Duisburg, Germany. In 2001, he was living and working in his home country of Mauritania when he was detained and rendered to Jordan, beginning an ordeal that he would chronicle in his internationally acclaimed best-selling Guantanamo Diary. The manuscript, which Mr. Slahi wrote in his isolation cell in the detention camp at Guantanamo Bay, remained classified for almost 8 years and was finally declassified with substantial redactions in 2013. It's the first work published by a then imprisoned prisoner at Guantanamo. It was published in the United States and the United Kingdom in January 2015 and became an international bestseller, published in 25 languages. After 15 years of detention, Mohamedou was released on October 17, 2016 to Mauritania. The following year, he published a restored edition of Guantanamo Diary, filling in the U.S. government's redactions, and in 2021, he published his first novel, The Actual True Story of Ahmed and Zarga, which was published by Ohio University Press. He currently resides in the Netherlands with his family, where he advocates for closure of the Guantanamo prison and continues his career as an advocate for justice and as an acclaimed writer. Our other guest is Nancy Hollander. Nancy is a partner at Friedman Boyd Hollander Goldberg, the firm she joined in 1980. She's also an associate tenant at London's Doughty Street Chambers and is of counsel with the Geneva firm of Savolainen Avocats. For more than 4 decades, Ms. Hollander's practice is focused on representing individuals and organizations accused of crimes, including those involving national security issues, on trial and on appeal. She was lead appellate counsel for Chelsea Manning in the military appellate courts. She also won Ms. Manning's release in 2017 when President Obama commuted her sentence from 35 years to 7 years. Nancy has also represented 2 prisoners at Guantanamo Bay, Mohamedou Slahi and Rahim al-Nashiri, who is facing the death penalty and for whom she's won 2 landmark cases in the European Court of Human Rights, providing funds for his family and accountability for his torture at the hands of agents of the U.S. government. In addition to her criminal defense practice, Ms. Hollander has been counsel in numerous other cases. She argued and won a historic case involving religious freedom in the U.S. Supreme Court. She served as a consultant to the defense in a high-profile terrorism case in Ireland and has assisted counsel in other international cases. In 1992 to 93, Ms. Hollander was the first woman president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Chosen by her peers as a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers, as well as the American Board of Criminal Lawyers, she's also a member of the European Criminal Bar Association. And in 2017, she was appointed to one of the American Bar Association's International Criminal Justice Standards Steering Committees to develop standards for international criminal trials. A seasoned trial lawyer and respected criminal law expert, Ms. Hollander has taught in numerous trial practice programs in the US, Europe, and Russia, and conducted more than 200 seminars and presentations around the globe on various subjects. Nancy's received numerous professional awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Award from America's Top 100 Lawyers for New Mexico. In 2001, she was named as one of America's top 50 women litigators by the National Law Journal. And in 2006, she was profiled in Super Lawyers' top 25 New Mexico lawyers and has continued to be recognized every year since then. It's a true pleasure to have Mohamedou and Nancy on this podcast. And I should add that I worked closely with Nancy and Teri Duncan on Mohamedou's case during his imprisonment when I was at the ACLU. So in a sense, this feels like a real bit of a family reunion. It's so great to see you both and to hear you both and to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, my lawyer, Jean, for having me again. And like I said, this is surreal for me because I remember when I was in Guantanamo Bay 14 years ago when you first joined my habeas corpus case. And you took it upon yourself to pick apart this so-called use of military force, AUMF, something like that.
Bingo.
Yeah, and I was terrified because when I saw you arguing in the court, you had this very thick paper stack that you had in front of you. And you were talking to the judge, to the court, actually. I didn't understand anything. And I was telling myself, I'm really screwed. And this is like so surreal for me. And I'm sorry just to jump on this and say this because I always wanted to tell you and Nancy this. I was terrified because it was like nightmare. I was picked up from Africa in front of my mother. I can never forget, when this mukhabarat, secret police pulled away, just like you saw in the movie. And I could see my mother getting smaller and smaller in the rear view mirror. And then she disappeared as after 200 meters when the police car turned right and then turned left. And I was taken. I was despaired, absolutely despaired. And now I found myself just like a nightmare in front of people I don't know. I never met, in a court that does not belong in my neighborhood. I never asked to come to the United States of America. I never applied for a visa for the United States of America. And ironically enough, one of the reasons that the United States of America picked up arms after the Declaration of Independence, one of the reasons was that the British government used to take American citizens in the colonies and take them away from the United States to the UK in order to secure their conviction. That's actually in the Declaration of Independence. And I found myself in that ordeal and predicament, I would say, and except that I did not understand the language, especially this special coded court language, that you guys discuss about, and someone asked question, but I don't know why they asked the question. And it was just really, I'm so happy and I'm so grateful for you two and the rest of the team that you took me from death penalty case to be a free man who was never convicted, not even indicted. And for that, I thank you so much. And I'm so happy. And I know life is limited, but I'm enjoying every day.
That's so wonderful to hear, Mohamedou, to hear you and speak as a free man after that horrific odyssey that's depicted in the film when you just, as you said, and that see that in the opening when you're at this wedding celebration and then the next minute your life changes forever, this 15-year odyssey into a complete nightmare. And you mentioned this AUMF, this authorization for military force. It's this statute which was passed after 9/11, which was just very simple. Basically said, we're going to give the president the power to use military force to go after Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and to go into Afghanistan. But that statute was used and really misused by the Bush administration, by the Obama administration, every administration since, to conduct this global war on terror, which had as its victims people like you who were just picked up from their homes, never been in Afghanistan or fought against the United States, thousands of miles from any battlefield, and disappeared, held as, quote, enemy combatants, and subjected to torture and abusive treatment. And it's just so heartening to see you emerge. I don't know, whether the law had so much to do with it. I don't know, Nancy, do you, because in the movie, your character talks a lot about the importance of the law and the Constitution, but I've come to question how much that mattered in any of this.
I don't think the law mattered at all. I think this was all, let's just grab as many people as we can, torture them, although I question whether the torture was to try to get any information. I think they knew all along that the torture wasn't going to work, but they didn't care. They just wanted confessions, convictions. Initially, the government never thought anyone would find out about Guantanamo, didn't think that any law would be involved. The first military commissions didn't even have any appeal to a court. Went from the military commission, I think, to the president, who got to decide whether somebody was guilty or not. It was ridiculous. And it's still, the military commission still has nothing to do with American law, or certainly American justice. The Constitution doesn't apply. It doesn't matter. But Mohamedou wasn't even brought in front of the military commission. In fact, we kept saying, charge him, give us a court where we can do something, put on real evidence. And of course, they never had any real evidence, so they weren't willing to do that. But you're right, the law had little to do with it. It was, we're going to get everyone we can because we lost 3,000 people. We don't care how many other people we kill, how many hundreds of thousands of Afghans we kill, Iraqis, people in Africa we capture. We didn't care. We, as in the United States, didn't care. I cared. You cared.
And the law, too, and this is in the film, in 2010, Judge Robertson in the district court in Washington, D.C., granted Mohamedou's habeas petition. And there's a scene after Mohamedou. I don't know if that's accurate or not, where you're celebrating when you get the news. I think you learn by a letter. I won my case. I'm going home. It seems to vindicate what Nancy was saying, right? You have Nancy through Jodi Foster in the movie. The Constitution doesn't have an asterisk. This is America, rule of law. And I went back, actually, I have to admit, I'm complicit in this as well. I went back and pulled the ACLU press release from that day, and I was quoted as proclaiming this a major victory for the rule of law. And yet Mohamedou languished in jail for 6 more years. And it wasn't a court that led to his release. It was approval by the review board, but it wasn't really the habeas process. So I think law certainly had nothing to do with what the government did, but in terms of seeking and obtaining Mohamedou's freedom, I think the law was, I have to say, a little bit disappointing, to put it mildly.
Well, the rule of law applied when Judge Robertson ruled in the habeas case. But as I often say, President Obama said out of one side of his mouth, we're going to close Guantanamo, and out of the other side of his mouth, his Justice Department, which he could have certainly spoken with, appealed almost every single habeas case that was won, including Mohamedou's. And Mohamedou stayed in jail for another 7 years because of President Obama's Justice Department.
Mohamedou, I can only imagine, you've already been locked up for about 9 years without charge, and the horrific torture that you endured. And then you win, you're vindicated, and yet it's taken away. Reasons Nancy explains. I don't know how you got through that, what that was like.
You're right. And Nancy actually sent me all the declarations you guys made, including you, Jean, your declaration. And I remember you described my case as one of the most quote unquote egregious case. And I remember I had to look for a dictionary to learn what egregious means. And that's the first time I heard this word, and I never forget what it meant since then. And this is also whenever I speak in Mauritania or in Europe, no one understands how could a judge declare you like innocent or not innocent, there is no evidence to hold you, and you could still be held 6 or 7 more years, closer to 7, because this completely negate and destroy the presumption of innocence. And this is in a democracy. You can hear that in Africa or in the Middle East, but hearing that something like this happens in the United States of America, a country that everybody is supposed to look up to, is just counterintuitive, to be honest. And I thought I was going home, and like people say, but they will appeal. One of the guard told me they would appeal, they can appeal. I said, who cares? They can appeal, but I'm going out. So, and if they can find something, they can kidnap you one more time. But there is no evidence to hold you, and you still can be held. Pending, another decision. This is so crazy. And what I explain to people here and to people in Mauritania is that I was also shocked because of the jurisprudence and the law in the United States of America is still developing. This is not like in Europe here with this very strict Napoleon code of conduct, just like military. And, the rules are by and large very clear, but the United States of America is adopting what they call here in Europe continental law with the common law, because the common law is just when the jury think you are a bad guy, you are a bad guy. When the jury does not think, then you are not a bad guy. This is common law. The community decides. And America didn't decide for either, and it's still developing. And still, that's why when I watch in horror how divisive and how partisan this discussion about nomination, you can bring Jesus Christ back, and if he's brought as a nominee by the Democrats, the Republicans would oppose him, and vice versa. I'm sorry to say this, but one of the most dishonest people in the Senate are the lawyers. Like listen to Ted Cruz and the other guy. And the other day, they were discussing with one of the nominees, you chose to defend criminals your whole career. You could have been a prosecutor. And I was like, oh my God, isn't that the job of a lawyer is to defend people who are suspected of crime, at times horrific crimes. But this is all a game, to make the person look bad. And those are lawyers. They understand this, It's so populist, so dishonest. And I'm just looking in her. But one of the things that you guys achieved, just to bring this very long answer to a close, is that the order that I couldn't be interrogated anymore. And I can tell you that the FBI did everything to destroy this court order. Using me, they came to me, they say, we get you films, we get you all the books you want, we get you the food you want. You just need to write that you don't accept this order. And I was like, I'm a detainee. I don't want to have any trouble with the court. I'm just playing dumb, to be honest. They told me, it's your right. I was like, wow, now all of a sudden I have rights. Of course, I didn't tell them any of this. They taught me that it's my right to destroy the court order and to say I'm not accepting it and to invite them back. And I was just so enjoying their frustration with this court order that after that session, after the judge was so angry with them, because Jean, what you and Nancy didn't know, I would come from the session from the court and they start interrogating me during the trial.
Well,
because they,
we learned that. We learned that during the trial.
yeah, go ahead, explain it, because I didn't know, because they wanted to have evidence so badly and they were running out of time. I don't know how they could run out of time when they interrogated me for 10 straight years, every day, day in, day out.
We found out that they were actually interrogating you about what you were going to be examined about, cross-examined about. And I recently reread that part of the transcript because now I remember saying to Judge Robertson, I am going to try to say this calmly, Your Honor. But
I remember that.
You have to understand how angry I am. And then he turned to them and said, what do you mean? And I think it was Mr. Patton. Well, it's not us, Judge. And he said, aren't you the government? There will be no more interrogation. Now, what you may or may not know, Mohamedou, or may not remember, is that after the hearing, the government filed motions, which are classified, so I can't tell you what they said, but they filed motions to get the interrogations back, and the judge simply never ruled. He simply never heard them.
This like makes my heart drop, because I couldn't imagine that small win, being destroyed, because this is all they held me there. Later on, I learned also, after the film even was released, I met the former Minister of Exterior, and in 2012, they asked the government for my release, official letter, and they wrote them back that I was, quote unquote, unreleasable. And the only reason why they kept me there is for interrogation. And now that they don't have any interrogation, they just went so like berserk. And they kept like giving everybody a chance to argue their case in front of this government body, actually, the periodic review board, I think they call it. And they just wouldn't give me. They just wouldn't give me. Just like, I think they allowed me in June. This is like about 4 months before I was released. This is like crazy. I kept asking Nancy, why they give everybody a chance. I know detainees who went many times, but they wouldn't give me one single chance. And they kept, to the very last day, send me FBI, and people who work with the FBI, tell me, Mohamedou, you need to improve your life. And they came to me, they took everything, and I wrote Nancy, and just like, I'm so happy that the judge didn't rule, on this.
Well, what you also may not know, and Jonathan, you may not know this, but Colonel Davis, when he was the chief prosecutor, Mohamedou wrote and said that he had come to visit him. And, we discussed this, Sylvia and Teri and I discussed this because Sylvia was in the case then. And she thought maybe we should take him to the bar and complain that he knew Mohamedou was represented, and Mohamedou told him. But then we decided, well, let's just go meet with him. So he went to meet with him, and he said, we just want him to be a witness and talk about, Islam, etc. And I said, well, what are you going to offer him? And he said, well, his family can come to the U.S. We can bring them or take them out. He didn't say the U.S., take them out of Mauritania. I said, they don't want to leave Mauritania. He wants to leave Guantanamo. And we discussed it, and we left it that we were going to fly down with him in one of his Gulfstream, one of the government's Gulfstream jets, and talk to Mohamedou together. Because I always wanted to leave the door open. After all, it was Mohamedou's choice anyway, and we might get something out of it. And then he quit. Colonel Davis quit, and he quit because he was a good guy and refused to deal with the tortured evidence. And he's, of course, has turned out to be a friend. But if he had stayed and we had gone down to meet with Mohamedou, who knows where that could have led.
What year was that?
Must have been early 2007. It had to be early because it was while Sylvia was still in the case. It was before the government's factual return. It's before Boumediene, which required the government to respond to our habeas.
Like one of the things that Nancy taught me also, Jean, during the trial, that the court, and you need to correct me on this, but that's what I understood, that the court assumes that the government is acting in good faith. But everything, Jean, we discovered since the habeas corpus, since this discovery, everything, at least what I saw, showing that the government was acting in bad faith. This is back in 2005, when first I was designated as first detainee for death penalty, just like in the movie. But the movie does not show my face when they told me I was selected for death penalty. I remember First Sergeant Charlie sitting like about 70 centimeters away from me and explaining to me what death penalty means. And he gave me like options. One of the options is to pick up someone and make that person also guilty and testify against that person. Then I get 30 years or I face death penalty. And he was telling me, your face, the way you speak, what you wear, this is a guaranteed conviction in American court. And turns out he was right about this. And I had no feeling. I completely lost any feeling. I just was listening to him and like nodding. And I just wanted him to go away so I could go back in my cell and just be alone. So in 2005, when Couch quit, just like in the movie, Mo Davis, the good guy, Air Force colonel, took over. And this is actually on record. And they asked FBI, CIA, military intelligence, and they all agreed there is no evidence. All of them unanimously, not one single agency said that there was something that warranted, my imprisonment. Then when he decided never to bring me to any court because there is nothing that he could present, but they never came to me and told me that, like, sorry, you know what, this was a mistake, and, we're sorry, mistakes happen, we're very angry. No, they kept just like piling up horrific mistreatment in order to hide, the mistake that they did in the beginning.
No admission that they made a mistake. And, you talk about like the level of corruption and all the things that were done to keep you inside. You mentioned Stuart Couch, who is played by Benedict Cumberbatch in the movie, right? He's the gung-ho prosecutor. He's excited. He hears he's going to be prosecuting this person who everyone tells him was a big Al-Qaeda recruiter, right? And then the way the movie describes it, like he learns the truth, right? That there's no evidence, that all the statements are a product of torture. And so he quits in protest. So in a way, it seems like it's a good moment. Someone's standing up, military official, lawyer is standing up. But then there's all these other things that happen to keep you inside, prisoned.
And Stu Couch gets a lot of credit for that. I mean, this guy was a Marine, and when he learned about the torture, it was Mark Fallon, who actually helped him get the information in real life. But they didn't want to give it to him. And he figured it out when he saw that Mohamedou was denying everything, and then all of a sudden said yes, yes, yes to all these questions. And he knew that something was going on. Plus, he had previously seen a prisoner subjected to very loud music. Let the Bodies Hit the Floor was the song they played, and strobe lights. And when he saw that, he was horrified. And he said to the enlisted guy, "This isn't how we treat prisoners." And he said, "Sir, you're not allowed to be here. You have to leave here." So he already knew that. But he first went to a Marine, somebody in the Marines, who said, "Just do your job." Exactly like it's in the movie. Just do your job. And then he went to church. That's all absolutely accurate. And he walked in and put it down and said, "You can give me another case." And he did take another case, but I won't do this one unless you find evidence. And at that point, he really thought there must be evidence. Surely it must be out there somewhere. I mean, they've had this guy locked up, and slowly he began to realize that there wasn't. And he and Mohamedou actually met. Was it last year, Mohamedou? Wasn't it last
Yes,
year?
we both met at your company.
Yes, in Geneva.
Yeah, in
And
Geneva.
Sylvain, who law firm that is, invited me, Mohamedou, and Stuart Couch, and they met for the first time. I have a wonderful photograph of the three of us together. It was just such a momentous moment.
I really think, Jean, if you could take one of those photographs and put it in your podcast, maybe. It's really beautiful because I gave him a copy of my book, and he was really very happy to meet me. And we did very, very good discussion, and we talk about death penalty. And he still said that he's a proponent of death penalty. And I told him I take this very personally, about this, because I know firsthand that you can kill people who are innocent. And I can never submit to something like this, because we just don't have the kind of guarantees that, will always punish guilty people. And you can see also that he was happy to meet me. And Nancy, of course, they became friends. And he wants also to visit me one more time with Nancy. I don't know when they can make time to visit us in Europe. And by the way, you are also, Jean, you are invited. You need to come here.
I will. I'm going to come in the spring.
Absolutely. You have a place to stay when you come.
Thank you, Mohamedou. There's that scene with Nancy and Stuart Couch or Jodie Foster, Benedict Cumberbatch, where he gives kind of exactly what you're saying. There's evidence, we're going to prosecute, and very sure of himself. And Nancy says, Jodie Foster says, what if you're wrong, right? It doesn't occur to him, and then it does. Although he still believes in the death penalty, but your story shows all the horrific things at Guantanamo. But I think more broadly about the death penalty, people make mistakes, and that's a big problem with the death penalty because it's irreversible. Mohamedou, you mentioned before you did not know English when you went to Guantanamo, and the film talks about that and shows you kind of learning and picking up words. You spoke 3 other languages at the time. Now you've added English, but you wrote Guantanamo Diary in 2005. So in Guantanamo, you've been there for a couple of years. It was a long time for detention, but in terms of a new language, not a long time, yet you wrote this in English. It's amazing. How did you do it? And why did you decide to write down what was happening to you? I mean, I'm sure you never thought what would happen, that it would become this internationally acclaimed bestseller, the subject of the movie, such an important book. What were you thinking and what motivated you to put this on paper?
So everything you said is correct. When I came to Guantanamo Bay, not only didn't I speak English, but I didn't want to hear English. Absolutely. It's like you shooting in my ears. And I used to plug my ears, to avoid just hearing them, Back then, the American accent was so horrific to me. I just didn't want to hear it. And, this is like a first reaction probably because of the trauma and the pain, that I suffered. My first direct contact with American forces, special forces, was in Jordan after 8 months in Jordan. It was really painful, these 8 months in the darkness when I was taken away. And I remember I always wanted to know the date. And I remember scratching when I think this is a day I would scratch and count. After 8 months, I lost 10 days. I don't know what happened to the 10 days. When they came to me, they said, you're free after 8 months. And I was crying. I don't know what to say, but I didn't want to be free, but I didn't want the nightmare. Why? I didn't want to go outside because I could be kidnapped. But the cell was safe from kidnapping because no one would kidnap me from a cell to put me back in a cell. But it was so painful. My life 24/7 in darkness. So they told me you are going home. And I remember I'm always blindfolded, except when I'm inside the cell. And the cell has no windows. So my life was always darkness. So they took me to a place inside the building compound, and they took the blindfold, and I sat in front of a man, middle-aged man, who had no smile, just like poker face. And he gave me back my stuff. Driver license, I had, I think, about $60 in my pocket when you converted, I think. Some euro, some Deutsche Mark back then. And he asked me whether this is everything. And the answer was always yes, because I was in no place to challenge a mukhabarat, secret agent officer supported by the United States of America. They took me, but when they did not take me home, they took me to a special team, turned out to be CIA team. When they start like ripping off my clothes and stripping me naked, I knew then I was not going to Mauritania. I know that there are two options, either death penalty or forever, perpetuity in the United States of America. And this was so scary. This meant, in either case, death. And I started to evaluate my life. And I had spite, spite from the thing that I wish I hadn't done, and spite of the thing I wish I had. I can tell you there was no regret that I didn't have money. There is no regret that I didn't have this beautiful woman I always dreamed of. And there is no regret that I didn't have an apartment in Paris. But there was only one thing I regretted. Only one thing, that I wasn't kind enough with people like my mother, my sisters, my brothers, my friends, the people I meet, the people I get involved with. And I took upon myself, and I told Nancy, and Nancy knows this, because Nancy saw me in very, very dark places. And I always told Nancy, I have a vow of kindness. I cannot break the vow of kindness. And it's not easy, and it's not perfect, but that's when I use the vow of kindness. So this reaction of hating the language was very initial and not real. I started to hear and pick up words, but I wasn't allowed to have papers or pen. And later on, they decided to take all the books that could teach you anything about the language from detainees, because I didn't have access to books anyway. So they did not want the detainee to learn the language, because they can hear them over the radio, they can understand what they want to say. So there was like complete, shut down. But I was very stubborn. And then the guards start like to smuggle books. And then I start to read them and give them back to them. And they used to give me paper to write the answer. And then I would write English words and memorize them, just like in Quran school. Very efficient. And I memorize every day. Whatever I hear, I memorize. And then after I don't know how many months, I could speak, I could understand. And then, just like I think Hemingway said, there is nothing much to writing. Just sit at the typewriter and bleed. And, that was the story of writing. And also, I just want to mention that Nancy told me that she could see the development of my linguistic skills. Like every time she said that my writing is better than the one before, because I was, teaching myself every day.
Truly incredible that you were able to do that, and that became such a powerful book. And then it took years for the book to get out, Nancy. You talk about, the process of getting what Mohamedou wrote out of Guantanamo and cleared by the government censors.
The reason Mohamedou started writing this book was when I first went to see him, he gave us about 160 pages, I think, in a green school notebook that the guards had given him. And I looked at it, but I only could look at it briefly because we, at the end of the day, couldn't get it back for the second day. It was gone up to the secure room. So all I knew was that he could write. But actually, I never read that book until later when he started writing us more letters, and it all merged in my mind. So it wasn't until much later, after he was out, when I went back and reread that part of the book, the first part, which was not classified, which was sent out, most of it, that I realized he had told us quite a bit of what he told us later in more detail. But I didn't know that. But I left there and I wrote to him and I said, can you tell me, write down, because I know you can write, everything the guards, the interrogators have asked you. And I did it for two reasons. One, I wanted to know. And second, I wanted to give him something to do. He was obviously an intelligent man. He knew how to write. I wanted to give him a task to keep his mind functioning. And he was angry at me. And he wrote me, and this letter came out in the Wall Street Journal because we released it. He wrote and said, you know, I was interrogated 18 hours a day for months and months. That's like asking Charlie Sheen how many girlfriends he's had. And, you know, it was very funny. It's because Mohamedou had learned a lot about American culture at that point. But he did start doing it. And he did it in letter form to me because it was the only way I could get it to come up through the privilege team. And they released it, but they released most of it as either classified or protected. In fact, all of it. And we litigated this for a few years in front of a magistrate, arguing that we were entitled to this, and the government saying, well, this has nothing to do with his legal case, and our arguing from the Gentili case, sometimes public opinion is the only law you get, is the jury of public opinion. There's a quote in that case somewhere that I quoted, and we argued that, and we lost. We kept losing. They said it's too much for the privilege team. We won't know if there's any codes in there. We can't do it. And so finally we went back to Mohamedou and said, look, if we want this out, you're going to have to give up the attorney-client privilege. Mm-hmm. And we don't think there's anything harmful in here, but it's your choice. And he agreed. So the first thing the government did was make it an exhibit against him, and it stayed protected. And then we litigated that, and the lawyer for the privilege team agreed that they would go back and review it. Whoever the agencies were that, you know, had equity in this, we never knew who they were. Probably the CIA, the FBI, DIA, who knows. Anyway, that took 2 years. Then it came back and it was all still protected. And I remember calling that lawyer and saying, this is not what we agreed to. And I have the notes here. And she said, you're right. So they sent it back again. And it took another year. And then all of a sudden, one day out of the blue, 466 pages unclassified showed up in my office with a letter saying we could use what was in that 466 pages. And that's when we found Larry Seams to edit it. And then we found the publisher, and then it took a long time to get it out. It was a long, long process from 2005 to 2000. When did the book come out? 2015. 2005 to 2015 for the book to come out. And I can tell you another kind of funny story that you'll appreciate. Mohamedou was in prison, so it was kind of bittersweet for him. The book comes out, and I get to go out with Larry and Teri to some extent. And, you know, we're on TV and we're on all kinds of radio shows and television shows, and we're in England. And we get to be out there talking about this book, and he's sitting there in Guantanamo. Well, I was in London, and I said to the publicist for Canongate, who was coordinating this, we need to get on RT, the Russian television. And she said, well, we don't usually book RT. And I said, yeah, but Mohamedou sees RT in his cell. And at that moment, I get a text on my phone from RT saying, will you come? Kind of bizarre. And I showed it to her. And I told Larry, this is the most important interview we're going to do. So put everything into it. And sure enough, you know, RT is like CNN. They repeat everything and they have a headline. Sure enough, Mohamedou saw it over and over, and the guards saw it. And it was beautiful that he got to see it and they got to see it. It was really something.
That is amazing that RT, to think now that that's the television station that you were able to get in Guantanamo, and that the way you write this amazing book, you're still locked up, right? Nancy, Larry Seam's editor, and Teri are out. The book is taking off like a rocket, and you're still there. And the only way you get to see about it and hear directly is through an interview on Russian TV. I mean, it just...
Well, the U.S. had stopped letting them see any television they had to pay for. So while we were not allowed to talk about current events when we were in Guantanamo, he's watching RT, Press TV, which is the Iranian station, a Venezuelan station, and at the same time, during the Libyan war with Gaddafi, he's watching all these Libyan stations. Then he and I watched with Gaddafi talking, and it was bizarre. But that's what they could watch because it was free. The U.S. could get it for free. And, it makes no sense. But I think maybe they didn't know what they were doing. I don't understand. But that's
for sure. They didn't know what they were doing. Mohamedou, and for you just to see like you're there, and what is that to see this book you wrote just take off, and you're still in prison, right? It's a book about your story, about the injustice, and you're still on the receiving end of it in terms of experiencing the injustice itself. Again, it's just like another thing you had to go through.
Yes, so what happened after I won habeas corpus case with your team, the government was fighting, sending me note, trying just to interrogate me, going back to the good old time. And I said every time, no, but thank you. And so when they gave up on me, they came to me and they took everything, including like TV, the movies that I had, everything. And so I was taken, but what they did, there was like something positive. I was taken out from the ghost detainees status. I was not in any computer. You cannot see me, you cannot find me. But they put me back, and then they took me away, and then they put me with first with just one detainee, and then after that, isolation for different reasons. And I was sitting because now I had access to detainees library, so I could get books. And with the library, you can also get instructed, like every once or twice a week, you can get instructed, you can choose. And I wanted to learn Spanish, but there was no one who spoke Spanish from the instructor, but one Egyptian contractor said, yeah, I can help you a little bit. So he could give me a book. And then we sat there one day learning Spanish. And then the TV headline, the first thing that came is my book. I was like reading, I was paying attention. And then Ahmed, he called himself Ahmed. And he said, look, you know this guy? And then it was my photo, And I felt really free. This is like one of the moments that you understand that freedom is not just being outside, out and about or having money, but there is the freedom that is inside you. And ironically, that kind of freedom, no one can take that away from you. Happiness, forgiveness, and kindness. Those kinds of freedom that you can even maintain in yourself, in chains, are the kinds of freedom that no one can take away.
Beautiful. I mean, it's easy to say, but to live it, Mohamedou, I mean, it's like the test that it's like Job for you to have that after going through what you did. It's one thing to say it, like you're saying it, but to have that and to live that when you've gone through what you went through is another thing. I mean, another thing that's interesting and fascinating about the book, and I don't know, I mean, if you have a different view, Nancy or Mohamedou, but I think the book was also important in obtaining your release because I think it made it untenable for the Obama administration to continue holding you. So between that and other things you did, your relationship with Steve Wood, the guard who you became friends with, who ended up giving evidence or a statement before the periodic review board, right? A little bit of shown in the movie. There's a guard who you have the kind of friendly conversations with. But all these things, and especially the book, is what really got you out of Guantanamo more than anything else, more than habeas and lawyers' briefs and arguments about the AUMF or anything like that.
We also had a wonderful personal representative. They were given personal representative in case they didn't have lawyers.
Right.
And Mr. Jackson, some of them weren't any good and they didn't care. He really cared. He really cared about Mohamedou. He believed in him, and he was a big help in framing what Mohamedou was going to say in front of the periodic review board, which became important. And so I like to give him credit for that. I saw him afterwards. I've kept in touch with him. And he's an engineer. He was in the Corps of Engineers, nothing to do with the law. So he would just recognize someone who was innocent and he wanted to get him out. And it was really something. It was really something.
I remember that night. I think is his name Jesse? I don't remember his name. Something like Jesse with S. His first name was something with S. And you're right. It was very helpful. And we went through a lot of material. And so the bottom line is this. In order to get out of Guantanamo Bay, and this is not me. This is the former prosecutor, Colonel Mo Davis. He said, in order to be able to be freed, you have to have committed a crime. And there is no way out of it because the government needs to show we convicted this person and this person served his time. Now we can release him. Outside of that, there is no way for you to get out. So for me, I needed a miracle. And if we, this is my judgment, if we to name only one miracle, it would be the writing of the book. I think it was like the saving grace. However, it's not only that. The government is very powerful. We have democracy. I believe in democracy. I think democracy is the best we could come up with. But I think there is a mistake in the design of democracy because we have these three different branches of government. In every democracy, you have the judiciary, you have the legislative, and you have the executive branch. However, the executive branch has so much power, that it completely upsets the balance of power. If a judge declares you free, you're an officer of the law, just like Nancy. But if a judge tells you guys, your client is free, you cannot free that client. Only the government can free that client. And this is a very upsetting thing in the whole democratic, which is the best thing. And so the other thing that we really needed so much momentum. And I can name two things that really were very powerful, like the letter from my former prosecutor, Mo Davis, who wrote in my support. And the letter of my former guard that you mentioned in the movie, Steve Wood. We became friends in the prison, but we kept our friendship in the closet. And it only came out when I was a freed person. We came out of the friendship closet. And beside other things, because I also was very active in my defense. And I think that's very important, like always for a lawyer, and you know this better than me, to recruit first and foremost your client. Get your client, believe that he is or she is innocent, because this is very hard. At some point, I really thought, I must have done something I've forgotten. This internalization of racism, of colonialism, of victimhood, because the good people is the American government. I see their faces. They wear beautiful clothes. They are the one who give you food every day. They are the one who smile. And if you see detainee, very upset, crying all the time, it's not a person. I don't want myself. I don't want to look in the mirror and see myself. I want to look in the mirror and see a sergeant or an American interrogator, because at least they wear good clothes and they take good care of themselves because they are not prisoners. They are not being victimized. And one of the night, and I never told Nancy this, one of the things that were really hard for me to face is the case of a Yemeni who is still in Guantanamo Bay. His name is Ramzi al-Shaiba. Ramzi al-Shaiba was horrifically tortured. And I know this because some of the people who were in the dark place with him, I met them in Guantanamo Bay. When I told them, guys, I have a problem. They said, what's the problem? I said, the interrogator kept telling me that Ramzi al-Shaiba made statement against me. I don't know him. I don't know him. I saw him once. He could not have made any statement. And then this Yemeni young man told me, Mohamedou, you don't know what happened to him. I was with him in the prison. We couldn't sleep because he was crying all night long. This is only a very small part of his imprisonment that I know. And I didn't know what to do, Nancy, when they tell me in the board, he made statement against you, because there was no way for me to fight those statements. And then I couldn't sleep this night. And then I start to write everything I was afraid of. And then I destroy it until it's very small pieces. And I go to the bathroom and then I flush it down. And I think we hit a home run. I don't know what Nancy think, but PRB, one shot, one time, and we hit it very hard with every single weapon that we had.
I mean, it was an incredible presentation that was made through you, through Teri, through Nancy, the rest of the team. The stars aligned and you were able to go. And I should say, if it had been 2 years later, Mohamedou, I think it's fair to say, with the Trump presidency, right, the door would have closed. No one got out except for one person. There was an agreement, well, basically a binding agreement as part of a plea negotiation. The only person who got out during Trump, as bad as Obama was in failing to close it, there was a chance to get out, but the door shut for those next 4 years under Trump. So fortunate too in terms of the timing.
The PRB is a group of DOJ and I think 5 intelligence organizations. And you don't know which ones they are. You never see them. You never get their names, but they have to be unanimous. And then it has to go up to their superiors and they have to be unanimous. And then Congress has 25 days in which to change it. Now, Congress never did change any of them. And sometimes they put them in front of Congress cleverly when Congress was out, because at that point, no one wanted it. But then you still had to get out. And Mohamedou was fortunate in that he could go home, which made it easier than, for example, the Yemenis. And, this is another thing that people need to know. There was a Nigerian man who was flying over Detroit and tried to blow up the plane with his underwear. He had been trained by a Yemeni who was actually raised in Las Cruces, New Mexico, by the way. And so President Obama said, no more Yemenis go home. And now who is it who's stuck there? Mostly Yemenis. And there are people who've been cleared for release, like Mohamedou was, who are there and who stay there. And I know there's one Yemeni man whose family has money, and they've said, we can go anywhere. We can meet him in Bahrain. We can meet him in Qatar. What do you want? And he's still not out. And there's no excuse for this. So one of the things that Mohamedou and I believe is that the film, can help to get the rest of them out. Because the book helped Mohamedou. The film originally was supposed to help Mohamedou too, but it didn't. And it didn't come out until later. But now it's beginning to give voice more to what's happening in Guantanamo. And the other thing is that Mohamedou and his guard, Steve, is a wonderful guy, are depicted in a 20-minute short called My Brother's Keeper, which is on YouTube. And there are a lot of things called My Brother's Keeper, but you can't miss this one. It's a little brown guy wrapped up in a turban and a big white guy who looks like a soldier on the front of it. And it's worth watching because as sad and horrible as everything is, that's an uplifting and beautiful story.
That story itself is so moving. I certainly encourage people to watch it and learn more. But just to encapsulate right there, all the things wrong with Guantanamo legally. You have someone like Mohamedou, not charged with a crime for a regular court. The government's trying to put him before a military commission, which is this made-up court that the Supreme Court struck down originally, doesn't provide fair procedure. So it's not a regular court. They can't even put Mohamedou before this made-up court because the prosecutor learns that all the evidence was obtained through torture and is unreliable and that there's no offense they can prove. He quits in protest. So then they shift and they hold Mohamedou indefinitely under this made-up term called enemy combatant. he wins before the district court. We win the habeas petition in 2010, but the government appeals. When you win a criminal trial, if you win in court, like Mohamedou said before, you go home. But no, the government keeps him in for appeals for another 7 years. And then he's only goes home because the stars align and he's able to persuade this body that's set up, almost like a parole board, except it's government intelligence agencies and it's for people who've never been convicted of a crime, unlike parole. And they clear Mohamedou and he's able to get out in the window before Trump shuts down Guantanamo, and because he's fortunate enough in the sense that he has a country to go to, unlike Yemenis or others at Guantanamo or people I've represented who've been stateless, who just end up locked up because the U.S. doesn't want to send them to their country. So it really is a kind of a miracle that you were sitting here talking today in the greatest sense.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's what I tell young lawyers every time I talk to them, which is miracles can happen. And never give up a case. I had some others that are similar. Never give up. But don't be afraid to question precedent because it changes. And the only way it changes is through lawyers who have this incredible power to promote change for the good. And it's what we have to do all the time. Things can be dark, and we had some dark years with Mohamedou, when Teri and I would go to visit him just because we needed to make sure he was okay. And he wasn't okay. He was depressed. We were depressed. We didn't know that he would ever get out. When that book came out, we had no way of knowing that he would ever be released. And even up to the very last minute, until that plane touched down in Mauritania, anything could have gone wrong. The State Department said if his family announces that he's getting out, it's all off. And then when he was there, and it was all over the Mauritanian press, and we found out about it, and I called the State Department, and they said, well, you can't announce it until we're wheels up out of Mauritanian airspace. They said, give us 2 days. And I said, no, I mean, he's out, and it's already out there. And we'll give you 15 minutes, and then we're going to publicize this. Because at that point, there was not anything they could do. He was on the ground in Mauritania. And the first few minutes of that are in the last moments of the movie. You can see that, his literally first few minutes.
And the celebration, the welcoming, and that's amazing. I think it's worth pointing out, too, when you were free and they couldn't detain you, but the U.S. government in the shadow of Guantanamo followed you. I mean, it followed you, I think, emotionally, well, forever, but practically speaking, your travel was restricted. I mean, you weren't free in the normal sense when you're released from custody, right, Mohamedou?
Absolutely not free. And Nancy and I went through hell, and it was at times very emotional. When I was released, I was not allowed to leave Mauritania ever. Turns out the US asked them never, ever to allow me to leave Mauritania or to have a passport. And with the new president, when this took 3 years of fighting, peacefully fighting, and when the new president, Ghazouani, took over, he allows me to have my passport. And the US embassy in Nouakchott wrote the Western embassies that they consider me a bad, quote unquote, bad guy. This was published by Der Spiegel. This email was leaked. So they did not want me ever to live my life, ever to be a person until the day I die. But I'm not challenging anyone. I'm not showing the middle finger to anyone. All I want to say today that I'm a free man, and I'm in Amsterdam, arguably the most liberal city in the world. And I'm traveling. I was in the UK. I was invited by the parliament more than once. And I held speech at the UK Parliament, the European Parliament inviting me next month, in September. But I don't have time because I'm meeting Nancy at the same time in Norway. And I'm just telling you that this is not a win for me, but a win for people like you who did not trust the government, who did say, no, we don't always believe that the government acts in good faith because we know history. And democracy is invented for the purpose of lawyer like you guys to question the government. And I just want to give you a story that happened, and Nancy doesn't know about it. I always tell Nancy, after the movie came out, that a lot of people call me and contact me through social media, and they tell me, oh my God, we saw the movie. We are so inspired. We want to study law. And this is a little bit disheartening to me because no one ever told me, oh my God, I want to be kidnapped and be put in prison for 15 years, just like you. All of them, they opt for Nancy's option. And one person who could be listening to your podcast, and I would not tell her name because I would leave to her to say her name. She contacted me after the movie was released, and she told me that she was so inspired. She's from Kazakhstan, and that she's going to study law. Okay, that's, I got a lot of messages like that. A couple of months back, she contacted me, said, I'm in Paris, I studied. Now I'm in Paris, I get this very special scholarship from France for very bright law student. Now she's studying in France to defend other people in a part of the world where human rights violation is not very uncommon.
It's inspiring to see how you inspired people like that, your story. That's incredible.
You mean Nancy's story, of course.
I want to ask another thing about the movie. The movie seemed to get a lot of the small details about Guantanamo right, in addition to capturing the overall Tahar Mohamedou story. The small plane that the attorneys had to take, a little nicer than I remember, but no facilities on board for the close to 4-hour flight. The military escort who follows you everywhere on the island, the stop at McDonald's that the attorneys would make to bring food for their clients when they met them, how the government took your notes as soon as you left the meeting in order for them to be cleared by the privilege review team, how you would have to travel when you're in the United States to the Soulless facility in Crystal City to review anything that was classified. And the classification was just excessive. Even the Don't Feed the Iguanas t-shirt that they'd sell at the Gitmo gift shop. So did you work with Kevin Macdonald and his team on trying to get these sort of small details about Guantanamo right and capture on the screen?
I did work with them, and Teri worked with them also. We had to tell them those things because Mohamedou, of course, didn't know about them. So we talked to them. We gave them transcripts of everything we could, including the hearing, which is almost completely unclassified. And that helped. And I met with Jodi a couple times. And one time she called me and she said, we have a scene where I'm arguing about a case. It was Boumediene. I'm arguing about a case. Would I have it in front of me? And I said, yes, you would. And you could point to it and cite it and quote it. And she does that in the court. And that's because we talked about it. We spent a lot of time with them. At the very beginning, I went to London and was taped for 5 hours. We stopped in between and had lunch so that Kevin could ask me lots and lots of questions. And then a lot of follow-up. So we really helped them. We argued about things. They didn't do everything we thought they should, but they changed the film in some ways. We watched lots of iterations of the film and said, no, this isn't right, something like that.
One thing where I thought, my own view, they took some poetic license with, and I understand it from the idea of telling a story, was your relationship, Nancy, with Teri, who's played by Shailene Woodley. You are the experienced, tough veteran, which is all true. I mean, you're a little folks here, but they kind of get that, right? But Teri, to set up the contrast, the character is this more naive, young attorney. Now, I spent a good deal of time with you both in the case, and my recollection of Teri, she's younger, but she was plenty tough, plenty experienced. So that was one thing that when I watched it said, I get it because it helps tell this other dimension of the story with your relationship to her. But
well, it's interesting about Teri. At that time, she had already done the Oklahoma City case, and we were in the middle of the Holy Land case. She is a lot like that. However, Teri is now a death penalty lawyer, and at no time would she ever care if her client was innocent or guilty. That wouldn't come up. But she agreed to this for the sake of the movie. She's the one that the audience identifies with. And she's really two people, because Sylvia did quit and we have different opinions of why she quit, but she quit very suddenly. So Teri kind of becomes the person who quits, although she was not willing to have her name put on it if it was said that she quit. So they changed it to I fired her, essentially. And the one thing that's true about that is that if a lawyer had come to me and said what she says in the movie, I wouldn't have reacted quite the way Jodi did, who I hope meaner than I am. I would have said, you have to reconsider whether you want to be a criminal defense lawyer, because you can't, if you're going to take this position and you're off this case and you think about it. That would really have happened. And then she comes back when the polygraph proves that he's innocent. Of course, that's just not true at all. She was there the whole time. And it was to Teri's credit that she agreed to this for the movie.
Yeah, I mean, that was what I was saying, is she was just a defense lawyer through and through the whole time.
Always.
Yeah, so that's not Teri Duncan. But I understand why, you're still making a movie to some extent. And I guess in the end, ultimately, it makes the movie, gives it another dimension to the story and attracts more attention and makes it a more powerful vehicle for telling Mohamedou's story. So in the end, I see it. Mohamedou, what was it like Nancy, too, to see yourselves on screen? You both had phenomenal actors playing you, but was it strange?
It was for me, it was strange. And I told Jodi when I first met her, I said, I've been myself in films, in documentaries, but nobody's ever played me before. And she said, well, we're even. I've never played a real live person before. She said, I played in The King and I. She said, but that person had been dead for 200 years. And she was nervous about it. And I just found it eerie. I've gotten accustomed to it, but I found it eerie at the time, just weird. And Mohamedou and I went to South Africa for a few days and watched them filming, which was even stranger.
Yeah, to me, to everything that Nancy said, I'm happy because I got to be played by a guy who is hot. And everybody think, especially white people, that they think that we really look alike. And I said, of course, we are brown people. And so the other thing, it was like, again, surreal to meet Nancy on the set in South Africa. And they took me for the first time. Everything was first time. It was the first time ever I flew in first class. And it was the first time ever I was taken to a quote unquote fancy restaurant with a guy with a French accent, who does a lecture every time they give us something. I didn't think I have to listen to a lecture when I'm really very hungry and I want to eat. And Nancy told me this is very fancy. And he gave us something I thought is for free because they said courtesy of the chef. Turns out it was not free. It was really very expensive. But I enjoyed the shooting. I enjoy everything. And I can tell you this, because Nancy and I have this unique access to those beautiful people, actors, and I know a lot of people know Jodi Foster, Tahar Rahim, and Shailene Woodley, among many others. And those people are really very kind-hearted and very, very nice. When Nancy was talking about this, she was never been played in a movie. She never seen someone playing her. Jodi told us also that she does not like to watch her own movies. And this happened to me. It was very painful for me to watch the movie. It took me a very long time. And there is one thing that happened in the set, and I share it with you, John. I remember when they took us into the plane in a very long row, one of the actors, broke down. And he had to excuse himself. He said he cannot play the role anymore, and he quit because it was so intensive for him, just not to be able to see, even though, this is make-believe. But this shows you already how much pain those people who were kidnapped and who are being kidnapped everywhere, not only in Guantanamo Bay. There are many Guantanamo Bays in the Middle East, many Guantanamo Bay in other parts of the world. And we need to fight all the Guantanamo Bays.
Absolutely, Mohamedou. And for you, seeing yourself on screen as another dimension, right? Nancy's playing the lawyer, talking about habeas corpus and the Constitution. But these are just horrific and very personal things that happen to you. And to see them on the movie and to know that millions of other people are seeing them, it's challenging and I'm sure traumatic in its own way, although important because it's part of the story.
Even though I went through this horrific experience, it's part of my growth. And knowing Nancy knowing you, John, knowing all the team, the people who work with you guys, including ACLU, including the artists I got to know also in the Netherlands, all of those beautiful people and the beautiful side of the United States of America. It was worth all the pain that I had been through. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for really representing the beautiful face of the United States of America.
Mohamedou and Nancy, it's such a pleasure to have you on the podcast and just to reconnect with you, Nancy, catch up and see you again, and Mohamedou, just to see you. And I mean, just the fact of doing a podcast with you, seeing you on Zoom as we record this from your home in the Netherlands, a free man, a world famous author. This is audio, but I'm seeing Mohamedou turning his camera on the Zoom and showing me his beautiful apartment and the view outside. It looks like a really nice park or square. And knowing like what you said before, Mohamedou, about how you had no window in your cell for much of the time. I mean, now to see you in your apartment with this view, walking around is just inspiring. I mean, and you're inspiring. So thank you both so much. If you haven't read Mohamedou's book, Guantanamo Diary, edited by Larry Seams, I highly recommend it. It is a classic and powerful book. And the film is streaming on Netflix and is an incredibly gripping film with amazing performances that really does a superb job at capturing Guantanamo. And also, Nancy, you mentioned My Brother's Keeper, the documentary with Mohamedou and his former guard, Steve Wood, worth seeing as well. So thank you both so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, John.